Hello friends, today we will discuss a very interesting theory in psychology called as the split brain theory. It was given to us by psychologist Roger Sperry in the 1950s and 1960s. So the split brain theory basically says that there are two hemispheres of our brain, the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere. The left hemisphere is responsible for the functioning of the right part of the body, and the right hemisphere is responsible for functioning of the left part of the body. And both these hemispheres of the brain work in coordination with each other, and they communicate with each other. But what will happen if the two hemispheres start acting independently? What will happen if they do not recognize the existence of the other hemisphere? This very interesting phenomenon happens when the corpus callosum is surgically severed. So the two hemispheres of our brain, they are basically connected to each other by a bundle of fibers called as the corpus callosum. So it is a part which enables communication to happen between the two hemispheres of the brain. But in cases like epilepsy, as a measure of last resort, the corpus callosum needs to be surgically severed. It needs to be surgically cut. So when that happens, usually the person is normal, but he will behave or he will start showing symptoms where the two hemispheres of the brain will start acting independently of each other. So it will almost be like one individual having two different brains or two independent brains, okay, in his one body. So that's why this phenomenon is called as the split brain phenomenon. So it was given to us by Roger Sperry when he conducted experiments on cats, monkeys, and even humans to study functional differences between the two hemispheres of the brain. Okay, and he reached some very fascinating conclusions. So he studied the corpus callosum. Like we discussed, it is large bundle of neurons that connects two hemispheres of the brain. So when he severed the corpus callosum in cats and monkeys to study the function of each side of the brain, he found that if the hemispheres were not connected to each other, they function independently of one another, which he called as a split brain. So this split brain enabled animals to memorize double the information. And when he tried the same idea in humans with their corpus callosum severed as treatment for epilepsy, which is a seizure disorder, people have seizures in epilepsy. So when he did that, he found that the hemispheres in human brains had different functions. The left hemisphere interpreted language, but not the right hemisphere. Okay, so because of this, he also won the Nobel Prize in physiology or medicine in 1981 for his split brain research. So let's understand in detail what this split brain theory is all about. Okay, so basically he began his research on split brain in late 1950s to determine the function of corpus callosum. So he noted that humans who have a severed corpus callosum, they first of all they did not show any major difference in function from humans having corpus callosum, but their hemispheres could not communicate due to the severing of the corpus callosum. So he postulated that there should be a major consequence from cutting the brain structure, as the corpus callosum connected the two hemispheres of the brain. Okay, and it was large and must have an important function. So he began designing experiments to document the effects of a severed corpus callosum. So at that time he knew that each hemisphere of the brain is responsible for movement and vision on the opposite side of the body. So the right hemisphere was responsible for the left eye and vice versa. So Sperry designed experiments in which he would carefully monitor what each eye saw, and therefore what information is going or was going to each hemisphere. So after several experiments on cats and even monkeys, okay, he moved to the human volunteers. Okay, so even in the experiments with cats and monkeys, he concluded that a surgically removed or severed corpus callosum, without that, the hemispheres cannot communicate, and each one does not acknowledge the other one, and each one acts like an independent brain or an only brain. So after this he moved on to human volunteers. So what he did is he did a couple of experiments with them. So he showed a word to one of the eyes and found that the split brain people could only remember the word they saw with their right eye. Okay, after that he showed the participants two different objects, one to their left eye and one to their right eye only, and then asked them to draw what they saw. So all the participants drew what they saw with their left eye and described what they saw with their right eye. So this led Sperry to the conclusion that the left hemisphere of the brain could recognize and it could analyze speech, but the right hemisphere could not do so. Okay, so at that time, in the 1960s, when he was doing his split brain research, many scientists they were studying brain lateralization. That maybe one hemisphere of the brain is better at performing some functions than other hemispheres. But researchers at that point of time did not have an idea about which side of the brain was responsible for or which hemisphere was responsible for which function. Now we know that there are functional areas in brain which are responsible for specific functions. Okay, so after such experiments on cats, monkeys, and even some experiments on humans, okay, he went further than anybody. Okay, when he conducted those experiments. Okay, so among humans, his next experiment was that he so basically now he knew that the hemisphere of brain would only analyze information from one eye, and they would not be able to communicate with each other what they saw. So now he asked the participants to look at a white screen with a black dot in the middle. So that black dot was the dividing point for the fields of view, okay, for a person. So the right hemisphere of the brain analyzed everything to the left of the dot, and the left hemisphere of the brain, it analyzed everything that appeared to the right side of the dot. Okay, next he showed the participants one of word on one side of the black dot for just less than a minute, less than a second actually, like for a few nanoseconds, and then asked them to tell what they saw. When the participants saw the word with their right eye, the left hemisphere of the brain was processing it, so they were able to speak what they saw. However, if the participants saw the word with their left eye, okay, so it was processed by the right hemisphere naturally, so they could not remember what the word was. Okay, this led Sperry to the conclusion that the left hemisphere of the brain could recognize and articulate language, while the right hemisphere could not do so. So now he tested, okay, the function of the right hemisphere. What is the importance of the right hemisphere? He asked the participants of that same experiment, okay, that could not remember the word, okay, because it was in the left visual field. So now he asked them to close their eyes and draw the object with their left hand, operated by the right hemisphere. Left hand is operated by the right hemisphere, so he asked them to draw their word, okay, and he presented the word, and most of the people, they were able to draw the picture of the word and they recognized it although they could not speak it. Okay, and he also noted that when he showed the word to the same visual field twice, then the person would recognize it as the word they saw. But if he showed that word to them, okay, to their different visual fields, then the participants, they would not know that they had seen the word before. So this led Sperry to the revolutionary conclusion that the left hemisphere was responsible not only for articulating language but also for understanding and remembering language, while the right hemisphere could not only recognize the words, okay, it was able to recognize the words, but it was not able to articulate the words. It could not speak them. So that supported the previously known idea that the language center was in the left hemisphere. Sperry performed other similar experiments in humans, okay, to further study the right hemisphere to recognize words. So what is the ability of our right hemisphere of our brain to recognize the words? He wanted to study that. So he asked volunteers to place their left hand into a box which contained different tools that they could not see. After that, the participants saw a word that described one of the objects in the box in their left field of view only. Sperry noted that most participants then picked up the needed object from the box without seeing it, but if Sperry asked them for the name of the object, they could not say it, and they did not know why they were holding that object. That led Sperry to conclude that the right hemisphere had some language recognition ability, but no speech articulation, which meant that right hemisphere could recognize, it could read a word, draw it, but it could not pronounce that word. So the person would not able to say it or know what it was. In his last series of experiments in humans, Sperry showed one object to the right eye of the participants and another object to the left eye of the participants. Sperry asked the volunteers to draw what they saw with their left hand only, with closed eyes. All the participants drew the object that they saw with their left eye because it was controlled by the right hemisphere. and they described the object that they saw with their right eye, which was controlled by the left hemisphere. So that again supported Sperry's hypothesis that the hemispheres of the brain functioned separately as two different independent brains, and they did not acknowledge the existence of the other hemisphere, as the description of the object did not match with the drawing. Sperry concluded that even though there were no apparent clear signs of disability in people with a severed or a surgically removed corpus callosum, but the hemispheres did not communicate with each other. So it compromised the full function of the brain. This phenomenon is called as the split brain theory. Thank you so much for listening. I'll be back with you with more such interesting psychological theories. Thank you.